Hi, my name's Nick and this is Imperator Rome. So I wanted to talk about trade goods and particularly about trade good distribution on the map. There are some things that are very intuitive and immediately apparent when you look at trade goods. So you can notice, for instance, Papyrus, this very sought after trade good, only in certain parts of the map, maybe even so there's some in the Ganges, there's actually some up there, but a lot on the Nile. And so these trade goods are very immediately, the import of those trade goods is immediate, and you can see, okay, well that has this extra research points. I will really want to conquer somewhere that has papyrus or gemstones or glass or whatever good you really want, maybe elephants. So there's that initial layer of the trade goods map mode where you can go, okay, well, I need iron for my heavy infantry. Where can I get that iron? But something that isn't immediately apparent is how that distribution affects either exports or getting your surplus in the capital bonus. Because, for instance, if we look at, and this is what the initial thing that spurred this video on, if we looked at wild game, so I was looking at what goods are around where I am and where would I want to colonize. If I was to migrate my tribe, where on the map would I migrate them to? Kind of just thinking about those things. And something that jumped out at me was this surplus in the capital bonus, because there are some goods that appear pretty common. For instance, wild game, like that doesn't seem that rare, and you can get it all over the place. But getting that surplus bonus in some places is harder than it initially appears. Because the only way to get a surplus, to get that surplus in capital bonus, is to either have 2 copies of that trade good in your capital province, or to have 1 and import another 1 in, or to have 0 and import 2 in. But importing means that you need to be exporting it, or a friendly country needs to be exporting it, and they need to have a surplus in their province in order to export it. So here, if we look at my country, I've just I could expand and get another province that has wild game, another city, I should say, another city that has wild game, another copy of wild game. But that city is in a different province. It's in Venetia rather than Galindia. And so because of that, the only way that I would be able to get that wild game surplus and capital bonus is to stack 15 slaves on either Venedicania or Caveria, and then get that an additional copy of the wild game, and then I would either just have the bonus in my capital province of Galindia, or I would get that bonus of 2 in Venetia, and then export it from Venetia into Galindia. And so there are some provinces, for instance, if we look at Vistulia has an inbuilt 2 copies of wild game. And so in many cases, if we look at this, those are 2 different provinces that have the 2 cities with wild game, so that doesn't have that inbuilt bonus, like the inbuilt surplus. However, this Borosthenia Majoris has 3 copies of wild game, so you could potentially get you'd get a surplus of 2 and be able to export 2 copies of it, or if that was your capital, you'd have 3 copies of it in that province. So because of that, I then started looking at other significant, in a military sense, trade goods, and how when we look at iron, there are places where you see concentrations of iron. Actually, this is a good example here. You might go, oh, like, there's lots of iron close together, but only this province here of Pontus Colopine has an actual surplus, while over here those 2 iron are in different provinces and thus don't have an inbuilt surplus. And there are some provinces such as what's that one in the Alps? Oh, I'm looking at countries. Alpes Carniae, or Carnii, has 4 copies of iron in it, which is a lot more significant than, well, obviously, than just having 1. Similarly, there are some places in, I think in, oh, actually, was it? No, not in Spain. Oh, actually, no, that province there, yeah. Cunea in Spain has an inbuilt surplus. So I just wanted to just mention this so that people actually, when they're looking at the trade goods, don't just look where are a particular trade good. It's also the case of how many trade goods, how many copies of that same trade good can I get in one province. And so finally, I just wanted to just look at actually dyes, because it's kind of interesting how there are, by my count, only 4 provinces. I mean, dyes are pretty rare anyway. It's not really that widespread, or it's widespread, but it's not that common. But there are 4 provinces, one of those being Carthage, Carthago, that have 2 or more dyes in them. So you've got Carthago, you've got West Sidi in India, or Sedai, or however one pronounces it. India has 2 dyes in one province. You've got South Phoenicia, which I think actually has 3 dyes in one province. Yeah. Oh, actually, no, that's just outside the provincial border. So, so South Phoenicia has 2, and then Caria Littoralis. Probably just butchered that. Caria Littoralis has 3 copies of dyes within its borders. So, in terms of building a surplus of dyes, that's the place to go. So it doesn't really, I guess my point, to sum up, is that it doesn't really matter how many copies of dyes you have in total, as much as it does how many copies in one province, because having more in one province gives you much more options to be able to export them and to build a surplus in your capital. Then just like if you had 3 dyes across your entire empire, that is not as useful as getting 3 dyes in one province. So I guess just look out for such instances. And I mean, you can see with iron, for instance, iron is fairly well spread through France, but it isn't necessarily very well spread in terms of getting actual double iron in one province. I think that's the only province with 2 iron in the entirety of France. So your enemies might have 1 iron, but do they, or they might have 2 iron, but do they have 2 iron in one province? So choose your provinces to conquer, maybe based on that rationale. Till next time, see you on the internet.